same time. So what I've done today is try to design a session to give you a bit of clarity on the role of PMO in Agile environments, and that's whether you're brand new to Agile or you already work with Agile teams. And I'm hoping at the end of it you'll walk away with some practical insights and some actionable steps as well. So what we're going to cover today. Today's session's kind of split into three sort of areas. We're going to touch on what's Agile, why is it important, a quick overview of what Agile really is, and we're going to do some myth busting as well in that part. What are the challenges for PMO in Agile environments, some common friction points, and I'm going to touch a little bit on how Agile planning works, because it's a little bit different to sort of traditional planning, and it does impact particularly on PMO and project managers. And then how PMO can evolve with some quick wins and some ideas for, and give you a little bit of space for some easy actionable steps and quick wins, and then a little bit of time for Q&A as well. There are some interactive areas as well that we're going to have some little bit of discussion, and you can contribute and ask questions as well. So first of all, let's find out who we've got in the room. I do actually know quite a lot of people in the room because I've brought my mates with me, it appears, but it'd be really interesting to find out who we've got in the room, what kind of role you've got, and how familiar you are with Agile. So if you wouldn't mind popping in the chat, what's your role? Like, are you a PMO, a project manager, a change manager, a BA, or something else, or someone who's just got an interest in Agile? And then on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being I don't know very much at all, and 10 being you should be sat here because you're a seasoned expert, how knowledgeable are you about Agile? Because it'll just help me when I'm talking through the session know how to pitch it really. So if that's okay, if you can do that. Information, senior PM, looking at 2 to 3, 6 to 10, 3 out of 10. Project coordinator, seasoned PMO. Project consultant. So we've got a range. So I'm going to sort of pitch this as there'll be some stuff that you know that I'm sort of repeating for you, and some of the stuff will not go into as much detail as perhaps people here know, but it will give everybody a bit of a grounding. I'm not deep diving into any of the methodology in any sort of detailed way. I'm really just picking out the things that I think will really impact on PMO and that would be really useful for us to have an awareness of if you're working in PMO. So just a little bit about myself. So I've worked in change and change spaces for over 30 years with lots of different organisations, sort of huge corporates like Xerox and Santander, and I've worked for the DWP and public sector and universities, worked for a software house, worked for an airline. So I've worked in lots of different spaces, and a number of those have used Agile to differing levels, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well as we go through the session today. So what's Agile? It's an approach to work that focuses on customer collaboration, iterative delivery, and continuous feedback. And the way Agile is sort of more described is more of a mindset rather than a specific methodology. Unlike traditional project management, which a lot of us, as I've seen in the chat, done Prince 2 and those kind of things, we spend a lot of time and effort in those kind of methodologies, making sure we're getting our planning right. So we do lots of upfront planning, we identify milestones, and we have sort of different processes for accepting change and where things are moving and changing. Agile really embraces change. You probably know that it started in software development, but honestly, I've seen it used in HR, marketing, banking, airlines, healthcare, government, all over the place. It's important to remember, though, that Agile is kind of an umbrella term. So it's like that framework, that mindset, that approach, but it covers a number of methodologies like Scrum, which is the one people always think about when we talk about Agile, but also Kanban, Lean, DSDM, lots of other sort of methodologies sit under that Agile framework or within that Agile family, really. And there's probably others that I've not mentioned on here. So why is it important? well, so many companies are using it now. So you've got your software giants and your tech companies like Apple, IBM, Google, Microsoft, all of those kind of people, PlayStation, banking, Lloyds, Santander, HSBC, I know use it as well. You've got government departments, insurance organisation. It's all over the place. The organisation I've always wanted to work at, Lego, use it as well, and there's just many more. It's kind of ubiquitous, it's everywhere. But there are a lot of companies that also say they use Agile, and there are definitely levels of maturity and adoption across different sectors and businesses, and within those businesses as well. So you might have areas of a business that have really fully embraced and adopted Agile, and half of the stakeholders don't even know what it is. So it's kind of a really mixed bag. And that's why I think it's really important for PMO to have a really important role in how Agile is worked across different organisations, particularly that bridge between what's happening on the ground and the senior sort of C-suite and those leadership. Let's just have a look at what Agile's based on, and I'm going to briefly describe this, so it's not in any sort of depth. But there are 4 core values of Agile, and I've depicted them here. So the values are described in the Agile Manifesto, which is a real thing, by the way. So if you want to Google it, you can Google it. It really exists. But what it's saying really around the values is that we value individuals and interactions, so conversations and having those discussions over processes and tools. We value working solutions or working software over a set of comprehensive documentation, and we value customer collaboration over contract negotiation, value responding to change over strictly following a plan. However, whilst we recognise that there's value on the items on the right, in Agile, we value items on the left more. It's not one or the other, though. It's about shaping our teams and ways of working to give more input to the higher value items. But it's not to say that those other things don't have a role. We will, of course, have contract negotiations if we get to that stage with a customer. We will have some documentation. We will have some processes. But it's just about the approach and the mindset and where the value and where the input is placed when we're talking in an Agile environment. So as well as the core values, there are 12 Agile principles, and you'll be thrilled to know that I'm not going to go through all 12 with you today, but I've just picked out the ones that I think are most relevant for PMO. So starting off with deliver value frequently. You will hear the word value used a lot in Agile, because Agile is really shaped around delivering value to the business, be that in a customer experience or in some time saving, some compliance with legislation. So what is the value that we're delivering to the organisation? And we want to be doing that frequently, rather than doing lots of work to deliver that value 3 years down the line or 2 years down the line. It's much more frequent delivery of value back to the organisation. Welcoming changing requirements. So as a project manager, I used to hate it when I got change requests, be like, oh no, I've got to do all my plan all over again. But in Agile, it's much more a learning environment, an iterative way of developing. And because you're delivering value frequently, you can assess the impact of that value, and then you can change and adapt and reflect against that value that you've delivered in order to deliver the next set of value. So it's really a continuous learning cycle, and those changing requirements might come quite late in development, or it might be quite frequent changes, but it does welcome those. That's one of the principles of Agile. We do aim to work together across business and tech, and in some of the Agile methodologies like Scrum, there are specific roles, like a product manager or a product owner, a role I've done, that really bridges that sort of relationship between the developers, the engineers, QA and testing, and the stakeholders, the users and the customers. So it's trying to get away from silos, stop chucking things over the fence to each other, but really working together. And there are sort of methodologies and ways that we do that to make sure that we are delivering something that is going to bring value to the organisation by making sure we've got everybody involved. we need to, because we're going to be delivering constantly and it's iterative and it's adaptive and there's frequent releases, we need to make sure that the work pace is sustainable, because we want to keep the quality of that work that's delivered high to deliver that regular value back to the business. That pace has got to be sustainable. Now, that's not to say that there aren't times when it's going to be busy and times when it's going to be a bit quieter, but the health of the team in terms of pace means that we want to make sure it's pretty sustainable to avoid burnout and avoid corner cutting as well, because we want those releases to be high value and high quality to be able to deliver back to the business. And then there's really a sort of an approach of continuous improvement, always learning. So there's the notion of failing fast. So if we're doing something, it's not working, it's not delivering the value, it's not panning out as we thought it would, we avoid that sunk cost fallacy of, well, we started, so we've got to finish. We'll fail fast. We'll learn what we've got to learn from it, and we'll stop and we'll pivot and do something different. And the ways we kind of do that in Agile, we'd use things like proof of concepts. We might do iframes so that we can show the customer, the user, the stakeholder what things are going to look like, just to test out whether we're on the right tracks. We might do A/B testing, so we might deliver something and then deliver something with a different sort of piece of development on it and see which one works, which one's gaining traction. Is it worth us going down that road, or is it not really adding the value that we thought? So it's really a no-fault kind of environment as well. And what I will say is, these are the principles that are written in the manifesto. This is our utopia of how it would be if everything was working perfectly. But we all live in the real world, don't we? So there are some myths and some, I'd say some myths or some urban myths that have grown up around Agile that aren't really strictly associated with the principles or the approach, but are sort of evident in some businesses. So let's smash some myths. Let's get let's kill some giants, really. So just thinking about those values and principles that I've just run through there, and maybe because we've got people with experience on the call, what are some myths or things that you've sort of heard tell about Agile that aren't really Agile, but are used in your businesses that kind of trip us up a little bit, or could trip us up in PMO? Anybody got any ideas? You can either put it in the chat or just say.
Tracey, the idea that that Agile means you don't plan, you don't. Yeah, absolutely. That's a biggie.
That's a big one. Yeah. Any others that we can think of? I've got some.
Yeah, the concept that there's no governance around business governance around Agile because it's self-governing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and no documentation's needed. Don't need anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. Great. Yeah. There, you'll be pleased to hear they are the myths that I thought of as well. So yeah, Agile means no planning. Well, is that true? No, it isn't. Agile plans continuously. It's just in smaller cycles, and it's a different approach. And I'm going to just touch on a little bit later around what that planning process looks like and what role PMO could play in that as well, and how we might need to adapt things. But yeah, absolutely. As you say, oh, we don't have to plan. We just do what we like. No, there's a lot of planning in Agile, actually. The myth that Agile has no deadlines. Well, that's not true. Agile teams work in time-box sprints. Deadlines exist, but they tend to be a little bit more flexible, and they're based on priority and value rather than on a fixed scope. So the way that the deadlines are sort of in operation is different, but they still exist. We still have some deadlines in Agile. Again, someone mentioned Agile has no documentation. No, it does. It just values concise, useful documentation rather than creating an industry or a cottage industry of creating loads of documentation. I think someone on the chat has or works in a safe environment. So a lot of people are sort of say that Agile doesn't work in large enterprises, it's just for small software houses. And that's absolutely not true. Whoever, I think Sandeep works in BT in a safe environment. There are frameworks that have been developed for that. And actually, because Agile is an approach and a mindset, it can work in any scale, really. And Agile's not just Scrum. Scrum is one of the frameworks, but there are many others, and Agile, as I say, is a mindset not just a process. And then the one that I used to think, actually, before I got to know Agile's just last minute and chaotic. Like, we don't need any plans. We're not beholden to anyone. We can just do whatever we want. And that's not true. It does follow some structured workflows that make sure the work is prioritised and organised, but in a slightly different way, perhaps, to the way that we might have done it in a more traditional sort of project environment. And then the biggest myth: Agile teams don't need PMO, and that's absolutely not true. PMO play a crucial role in bridging the business strategy, governance and Agile execution, and they are there to be able to enable those teams to deliver that value, but make sure what they're delivering speaks to the business goals and the business objectives. So they are crucial in an Agile environment. It's not without its challenges, though. So there are some common challenges for PMO in Agile environments. The approach is different, and it can cause some friction when you're used to dealing with things in a traditional way. And also, as I mentioned up front, the way that some parts of the organisation might have fully adopted Agile and some other parts of your organisation may be expecting the same kind of reporting or the same kind of information that they used to get in a more traditional environment. So I'm just going to walk through three of the common challenges. So the first is around governance versus flexibility. So I don't know if it's Rosie mentioned, Agile teams definitely want autonomy. It's in the manifesto, it says they're self-organised, but your senior leadership will still want to know where we're at, how delivery's going, and where there are issues. And that can feel a little bit like the two things don't match. From a funding perspective, Agile's iterative, as we mentioned, so we're doing continuous planning, we're looking at where we're going to add value, but businesses often have quite strict annual forecasting, planning, so we need to know how much we're going to spend, how much money we're going to make, what we're going to allocate to different projects, and where those resources and people are going to sit. So that can feel a little bit like they're playing in two different games, really. And then from a PMO perspective, our portfolio management, we often as businesses have fixed plans, we've got fixed budgets, we know what we want to achieve. Somebody in your C-suite might actually have that as a target to enable them to get their bonus this year. So that's very important to them and sitting at the heart of them. But Agile roadmaps often evolve. So that can feel a little bit like, you know, are we achieving something over here, but it's not actually translating onto the ground. So they can be really challenging places for PMO to sit, because you'd often be sitting in the middle of both of those and getting it from both barrels, if you like. So let's have a look at what do we think. Sorry, I've gone backwards there. Oops, I've gone all funny. So just going to have a look at where PMO plays a role in each of those. So from a governance perspective, PMO is still responsible for making sure we're aligned with business objectives, that we're managing our risks, and that the benefits and the value is being delivered. So it might be moving away from phase gates and strict emphasis on compliance to more coaching and giving those team guardrails to ensure that they can still be self-managing, but within a framework, within some guardrails, to make sure we're delivering that value back to C-suite, back to the leadership and back to the organisation. And we might move away from fixed status reports to providing more lean but real-time insights back to the leadership team, so that they know we've got the finger on the pulse, we know what's going on, we know what's getting delivered, and we've got a handle on what is going to be happening within the teams and what that value is going to be delivered. But the way we do it might be a little bit different. From a funding perspective, budgets, investments and team capacity still need to be planned, you know, that still needs to happen. But we might move away from annual budgets and fixed resources allocated at a very granular level to being much more adaptive, iterative, and thinking about dynamic teams, dynamic ways of moving people around and allocating resource and budget, depending on what's evolving, what's adapting, and what we've learned as we've been delivering some of those frequent releases, but still relaying that back to the business objectives and making sure we're still on the right track. So this is where PMO is playing a really crucial, critical role there. And then from a planning perspective, PMO needs to make sure that all the work that's been getting done is aligning to those strategic priorities. So we might move away from detailed upfront project plans to continuous value-driven planning, but it's still happening. The planning's still happening. So the message here is really that some of this is going to be delivered in a different way, but the responsibilities that PMO have still exist. We might just adapt how we deal with them and how we do them. I just want to do a little deep dive, and it will be just a surface really, look at the planning process and the planning hierarchy in Agile and some of the terminology that you might come across. So we'd start with a strategy. So that's our business goal. So for example, our business goal might be, we want to expand into EU markets this year. That's our strategy. And we need to make sure that, as from PMO, the work that's been done is aligned with those overarching goals. So there's a line of sight back up to those overarching goals. We then might have a little bit more detailed, but still high level roadmap, a high level vision, which might say, in order to expand into that market, we want to launch a new mobile app. So we want to do that. It's still not at a massively detailed level, but we know we want to do that at some point during this year in order to achieve that. And PMO will need to make sure that the teams understand which are the priorities on that roadmap to deliver that value, to create that strategy or to speak to that strategy, but remain flexible in when that gets executed. We then have a quarterly planning process, usually in Agile. And what is happening is at each level, we're getting a little bit more detailed, a little bit more specific into what is going to get delivered. But we're still not at features, we're still not at actual widgets on the app yet. We're still at what value are we going to be delivering during this quarter. So it's based on value. So in this one, we might do something like, launch. We might decide which platform we're going to be using, and we might launch a sort of a beta version for people to try out and have a look at. And then we get down to our sprints. So basically, our sprints are the little small cycles where we're delivering those features. We're actually doing those releases. Things are being delivered and going out to the business and to the customers. And what PMO's responsibility there is tracking and making sure the progress of those is visible. And we've got that line of sight right up through quarterly planning, through the roadmap, back up to the strategy. Underpinning all of this, we'll have our user stories. So user stories are the smallest level, and they are from the customer or the user perspective. So they usually be framed as a whatever, I want to be able to do X so that Y is true. And PMO would need to work to align the business needs, not just the technical tasks. So this is really understanding that value is actually a business value and how that is speaking to the rest of that planning, right back up to the strategy. Just take a breath there. So the upshot of it is PMO really is that bridge. In PMO, we can be the conduit for change. The role of PMO in an Agile environment is to enable, so it's to help those teams succeed. It's to be a communicator, so translating Agile for leadership or for other stakeholders, working with the other roles, product managers and product owners, as well as the development teams, project managers as well, to make sure that they're translating how all of this speaks to the business goals and giving that reassurance to leadership as to what's happening, because we might change the way that we're actually giving them their updates. They need to have that comfort that things are being delivered and the issues and risks are being dealt with. And then facilitating, making sure that business alignment goes through the threads of everything that's getting delivered within an Agile environment. So, transitioning to an Agile PMO. I've just identified 3 key things that I think are really important to think about when you're thinking about PMO in an Agile environment. So measure outcomes, not outputs. So those outcomes in terms of that value that's being delivered and how that speaks to the strategy and the business goals. replacing heavy documentation with much more lean reporting. So thinking about how could you access information and translate that for leadership without having a layer of burden of reporting or heavy documentation, and then making sure we're adjusting our resourcing and funding plans to align to the Agile planning process. So thinking about what happens in an Agile way and then how could we align that, rather than trying to have something that sits on the side that is kind of jarring with what's naturally happening within an Agile environment. So I thought it might be a good opportunity to take a couple of minutes to think about what's one thing you already do within your area that aligns to Agile that you can say, yep, actually, you know, that slots in perfectly. And then what's one thing that you could change that would move you towards PMO in an Agile environment? And you can either just have a think about those, or if you want to share those, then happy for you to share those as well with the group. Anybody got any ideas? Yeah, Sandeep.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Tracy. What's one thing that you already do that aligns to Agile? So in my current organization, I think we measure outcomes. We talk about OKRs. We talk about KPIs. We talked about quarterly objectives. So that I can confirm that, yes, we are not measuring the outputs or the deliverables. We measure the outcomes. Heavy documentation with lean reporting. I think in one of these slides you talked about in terms of dynamic reporting.
Yeah.
So we use enterprise Jira. So I have transformed the way how we do reporting. So what I could change is that the funding. Typically in the organization that I have worked, they always talk about the yearly funding processes, wherein you have a yearly, quarterly, yearly plan, wherein you talk about the budget for this year. What we are trying to understand working with our colleagues in finance and HR is how can we move away from the yearly funding processes into a more quarterly planning processes. In your previous slide, you showed us about the roadmap, sorry, the strategy, the roadmap, the quarterly planning processes. That is what we are currently thinking about how we could make that change.
Yeah, it is quite difficult. The last organisation I worked at, because often businesses have to report back to the stock market, to shareholders, you know, if you're in a private industry, and that does happen on an annual basis, unfortunately. So it is a shift in mindset, and we had to take quite small steps in order to do that, and do a lot of that bridging between what leadership were doing around annual planning and how we could translate that a little bit for some quarterly planning, and how we might be able to convert some of it into more quarterly and sprint planning, while then feeding it back up to the annual plan. But it is a process, because it is a different way for businesses to plan, who often operate on 5, 3 and 1 year planning cycles. That's my sort of experience. And I think as long as you're keeping those 5, 3 and 1 year planning at a less granular level, then you can make your quarterly planning and your sprints at a much more detailed level, making sure that you're still feeding back to those sort of features and outputs and deliverables that really are going to make that difference and deliver the value. That's really good. Thank you. Anyone else? No. I'll take silence as golden. But that might be something you can take away and chat to your teams, or chat to the other people in your PMOs around what's something we already do that actually is pretty agile, or what things could we tweak, or what things could we add or take away that would really help us move towards that agile environment. That really is the end of the slideshow. But time to give to you for any questions, or anybody got any comments, or anything that you want to talk about around Agile and PMO.
Oh, thanks so much, Tracy. I'll just open up to everybody now. Is there anything anybody would like to ask, or we could maybe start a discussion around?
Am I still sharing, or have I unshared now?
No, you've unshared, you're okay.
Thank you.
I have a question, and Tracy, you're not on the spot for this. I'd definitely open it up to everybody, really. I think one of the biggest challenges that many organisations can face within Agile is when they're, particularly within the space of PMO, is when they have a mixture of both. So they are being really pragmatic about how they utilise the different, whether they utilise waterfall or agile, etc., based on the project that they're delivering, or sometimes aspects of the project. The project generally could be waterfall with an element of agile within it, and that can be challenging, can't it? Because you have two different ways of reporting, two different ways of managing. And you're trying to kind of bring both of them together in order to be that air traffic control for the change within the organisation. So yeah, just really keen to hear your thoughts, Tracey, but also everybody's thoughts, whether you've seen organisations that have done that really well, and what you think the key to success is there.
So I have seen that done. I'm not saying I've seen it done very well, but I have seen it done. And because by nature, some projects have to be delivered by a deadline date. So I was working on a project that had to be delivered by the financial year end, because it was about a new financial general ledger system. You can't introduce one of those partway through a financial year. So there was absolutely a waterfall element to that project. But the development teams and the stakeholders and users all worked in an agile framework. So it was really about understanding which bits of value do we need to deliver in which quarter. It's just getting really smart with quarterly and sprint planning to identify what are our key deliverables, what are our key things that we need to have done, and how are they adding value during each of those sprints and quarters to be able to say we're going to hit that deadline. It is a bit like you're trying to rub your tummy and pat your head at the same time. You know, it's quite difficult because you're trying to balance that. But by nature, you will come across that, because you will have projects that have those kind of constraints, and you can't change some of that. And you also don't want to lose the benefits you get from Agile. So you're being able to move people around and having dynamic teams and ways of working. But it is difficult. It's a difficult job, and PMO were absolutely crucial in that project to be able to keep us on track and do some of that translation as well. So taking some of the stuff we were doing and translating that into a more of a formal waterfall type reporting and updates and status, while still enabling us to work agile on the ground.
Yeah, that's a really good insight, actually. So PMO do that almost translation in the background into the terminology and templates that those they're reporting into are expecting to see. Because that a good PMO is a pragmatic PMO, isn't it? It's one that is able to flex. It always makes me laugh when I think of the word agile, because I'm sure anyone that's come across agile will have met organisations and teams who use the term agile, which basically means we change our minds a lot. Not that we follow the agile methodology.
Or we do the ceremonies. That's the other one. You know, the myth I didn't put up there is we're agile because we have ceremonies, but ceremonies are not the approach. Ceremonies are part of a methodology, one methodology, but not it all. So that's another myth that I didn't put up there.
And just touching on that, Ruth, do we think that agile could possibly becoming a bit of a buzzword in organisations, and therefore becoming a little bit diluted and affecting, you know, the effectiveness of such a methodology in organisations? Do you think it is? It's because we do hear it, don't you? Like, we're agile.
That's a really good shout, Jennifer. So I've seen that in a number of organisations where they've said, yay, we're agile. But actually, when you look at it and their governance and their structures, they're actually working in a very uniformed way. I think the other point for me around agile is winning those hearts and minds in the organisation, so we think slightly different. And the notes that I've made there is around, you know, accepting the fact that we can try things, and if it doesn't work, it's fine, we can move on. And quite often that's not the thoughts of the C-suite team. So that's always a difficulty, I think, for me, applying that agile approach within a PMO, and proving our worth. I guess I always see that in PMO anyway. It's like we're right down the bottom of the pile, and it's sad, isn't it? Because we love PMO. That's why we do it.
I think just going on that, Louise, I think that's an excellent point. And I think one of the themes is to fail fast, but in Agile, and that's like completely accepted. Continuous improvement, let's try something, let's do a proof of concept if it doesn't work. But then the sales job is to say, we did this proof of concept, this is what we've learned. And that gives leadership then some comfort that we haven't like wasted loads of time and we're doing stuff that just keeps failing. So PMO can be really, really critical in pulling out what those lessons learned are, what we're going to take into the next piece that we're going to deliver or the next thing that we're going to release, to be able to say, well, we've learned something from that. We failed it, but we've learned something. We aren't ever going to do this again, or, you know, we know that this doesn't work or this is not going to add value. So let's keep a record of that and make sure that we incorporate those learnings into our future releases and future developments. So that's where PMO can really be that critical friend and enable the organization to accept failure, because that often from C-suite is not always something that they want to hear.
Absolutely. And I guess that's where we're the conduit, aren't we, to feed that up, to say, look, this is the benefits of what we've done here.
Yeah.
We're not going to do this again, but we're going to do these things again because we know it works and we're going to keep doing them. So, yeah, absolutely.
I wonder if there's something around the language as well within Agile that makes people nervous, because it's its own dictionary, really, isn't it? There's so many different references and new terminology, and it's how, as within the role of PMO, how can we simplify, not by changing that terminology because that just complicates things further, but being really clear on the principles. That's because that's what you started with there, Tracey, the principles of Agile, actually the definition and the why of the processes. And rather than what they're called, and that can sort of help people kind of feel more relaxed about why, you know, they're following each step and why they might take that particular approach, and it just kind of makes it seem less alien, really.
Because it's quite common sense, you know, and it is continuous improvement. It's a continuous improvement approach, you know, which makes loads of sense to anybody. But sometimes it can get all a bit muddled up and a bit elevated, shall we say, to something that's the unknown, because it's the Agile and it's, you know, the secret thing that we don't know about, and it has its own language and its own terminology. But actually it's pretty common sense, you know, let's try stuff, let's try and see where, and let's make sure everything we're delivering actually has some value and relates to the business's strategy. Well, that's what we should be doing all the time anyway, you know. So it's not, we're not doing things that are really weird, but sometimes the vocabulary, the way that they term things can be a bit off-putting for our regular stakeholders who aren't in the know, if you like. So providing some of that explanation and providing some of that context is really useful, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And Sandy, sorry, Jen.
You just, I think you're about to do the same as what I was just about to do.
Go ahead.
Robert. We had a question in the Q&A from Sandeep, and it was around typically in Agile environments, Scrum or Kanban or SAFe, Sandeep has led and managed transformation offices, so TMO, or in some organisations, VMO. Are there major differences between PMO and TMO VMO? And Ruth has provided a little bit of an answer, but if you've got a view on that as well, Tracey.
I think there's different names. You know, I used to always work in project office, and then it became transformation office. And I've got an ex-colleague on this call, if she's still here, Jo. Her job title changed drastically, but she's still doing the same thing. So I think there's something around terminology to make it sound different. But I think it sometimes is a little bit around what the organisation is on. So if they're on a transformation journey, say they're moving to a new target operating model, there's some cultural aspects, then transformation office does something slightly different. But if they're, you know, wanting to do product-led growth and they're developing products and services, then you can call it transformation office, but it's really kind of a project office, isn't it? Because there's a number of initiatives, is what we call them in ASDO. You know, there's a number of initiatives or projects that have epics and features that will be delivering that value. So that's really more of a traditional sort of PMO. I don't know, Sandeep, if you've got a view on it as you
That's
raised
fine. I think Ruth and Tracy, thank you. I think I saw the response as well. TMO talks about the strategy, value management talks about the funding, and also why are we doing this, and then the PMO supports that. I think I got that message as well. Thank you
Yeah.
to both of you.
It's again though, Sandy, the world of PMO, it's sometimes, so PMO sometimes has a bit of a negative connotation because it can be seen as a bit of a hindrance, slowing down. It can frustrate change when the processes are not set up in the right way and it's not championed and connected at that strategic level. And therefore, sometimes organisations choose not to use the term PMO simply because they don't want to carry with them any negative connotations that may be brought in by using the term PMO. So sometimes it's a TMO or a VMO or a strategic change office, SEO, because it's moving away from the term PMO. And sometimes it's because it's genuinely focusing on something different, like value or strategy or transformation. Yeah, it's an interesting world that always throws up many anomalies.
Thank you.
Rosie.
Yep.
Sorry.
Rosie, yeah.
Okay, I had
Tracey, that was a brilliant overview. Thank you so much. I've learned such a lot in just those few slides that you've taken us through. I just wanted to ask, if you were an organisation that wanted to transition over to an Agile PMO, what would be some of the core roles that experts that you would bring in to help you do that? Because obviously, if you've got a traditional PMO, it might be quite a difficult task to know actually how to transition. So I just wondered what are some of the core roles, and if there's like a good blueprint that you could point us to that would help you actually set up.
Well, I think if you're going to be changing to a Agile PMO, then your organisation is either already operating Agile or they're moving to Agile, because it needs to be part and parcel of the change of the way that the business is operating. So I would say that it needs to be absolutely linked to that, rather than Agile PMO being something separate and you bring in some different people. And I think it's more around thinking about what does the leadership need and what hasn't changed in respect of what PMO needs to do, but how might they do it in a slightly different way. So, the slide I talked about with governance, funding and portfolio management. So thinking about the areas that you still need to do from a PMO, and then working out on the ground and with the product teams, with you, if you're going to use Scrum, with your Scrum teams, or with your development teams, how are you going to then translate how that works, and what does your executive or your C-suite or leadership still need? I think in SAFE, Sandy, correct me if I'm wrong, there's the notion of a portfolio office, isn't there, and portfolio management, and PMO is quite heavily linked to that office.
There is something called as a lean portfolio management, which is the LPM, that is the top layer, and then you have various layers as well. That's correct.
Yeah. So if it's in a very large organisation and they're going to go down the SAFE, which is scaled Agile framework, if they're going to go down that route, then there are some defined roles. But really, if you're looking at changing an organisation into more Agile, then you will need to adapt that to the way that your business operates and where your business is starting from, and where you want to get to. So I wouldn't want to sort of blueprint what that looked like, but thinking about those different areas like governance, like planning, like portfolio management, like risk management, and think about, well, what does that now mean in an Agile space, and what does leadership still need? Because your C-suite will still want things in a certain way, even if you move into Agile, and they'll still want that reassurance and that comfort that things are happening. So you will have to adapt it in the way that suits your business, really. I know that's not really a very straightforward answer, but
yeah, no, that's great. That's really helpful. Thank you.
Anything else from anyone? So Tracey, if you had to choose traditional PMO or Agile PMO, where would you prefer to be?
Oh gosh. Well, as a project manager who doesn't really like doing lots of the planning. I love Agile. So for me, Agile is much more dynamic. It's much less paperwork heavy, and that suits my style better as well. And it's much more around conversations, discussion, trials, having a go at stuff. Getting stakeholders and customers involved. That speaks to all the stuff that I prefer. So for me, that would be my preference. But in some organisations and for some projects, as we identified, there's still some elements where you do need to have sort of a deadline, or you've got some other sort of element that needs it to be much more structured in a more traditional project and PMO way.
I think you're Agile. Lovely. Anything else, Jim?
I was just going to say, just building on what everyone's been saying around Agile PMO, it is a place that is good to be. There's no doubt about that. I think one of the problems I've come across in the past, which are not necessarily unsurmountable, but when you come in as a contractor consultant into an organisation, you know, you get that wariness and all the rest of it about, oh, you bring in these new things with you, you'll be gone and we won't know how to do it and all the rest of it. And it's somebody said it earlier, it's about getting everybody involved and included in the activity and understanding what it is you're trying to do if you're setting it up to start with, and being quite very open about it, you know, that it is a different way of working. And it can feel quite alien to a PMO that's very structured in a waterfall environment and been doing that for donkey's years. And from the C-suite, where they still want exactly the same reporting. and I get lots of questions from people around, can you help me align my waterfall and my Agile reporting to make it palatable to the C-suite? Yeah, and again, you touched on that, Tracey, earlier. So it's not a panacea to fix everything. And in terms of how Agile people are, well, that means different things to lots of different people. You know, I do a stand-up, so I'm Agile. Yeah, I've got Jira, so I'm Agile. You know, all these things come into play. I worked in one place, and the IT department was Agile. Well, they had a 2 weekly ceremonies and did everything waterfall. So they followed a classic waterfall life cycle, but did everything in 2-week stories, which was interesting.
Fabulous.
So it's not to say it's been around for a long time. It's still being talked about as a new element, which it is, I guess, in lots of organizations. And I guess the other thing is that you have to think about not everybody's going to ever adopt everything. People totally resist change, you know. And
we know that, don't we? In change.
And in a survey I did about 18 months ago, about something like that, about where was your PMO, and I gave them 3 options. One was the bottom of the heap thing, you know, all we do really is admin, right, and a bit more. We have some technology. The third one was we're leading edge. We're doing everything, all the sharp end stuff. And 25% of the respondees said they were still in that bottom third, in that bottom box, which I was really surprised at. I was expecting to see a very tiny number of PMOs still just doing bog standard stuff. And it's quite a thought-provoking response, really, because 50% said they had a mixture of stuff, which is what I was really expecting, and 25% said they were sharp end. But I was expecting only about 4 or 5%, because for the past 15 years that I'm aware of, there's been lots and lots of stuff about raising the game of the PMO and bringing them up the pecking order in sort of supporting organisations, etc. And I was really taken aback that it was still as low as 25%, which is a lot.
Yeah.
I just thought I'd share that on this call with you.
Thank you. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you. Really interesting. Thanks,
Thanks, Jim.
Just the other thing to say. So Rosie, you're talking about how you adopt more of a Agile PMO. I guess for me, the important thing that can make it stick is getting that C-suite sponsorship right up front, because then it trickles down the organisation in that way. So I think for me, that's where it can play a really crucial part in landing it to the rest of the organisation if you've got strong sponsorship there. So best of luck, and I'm happy to talk to you about it as well. So please reach out.
Thanks, Louise. Appreciate that.
No problem.
Brilliant. We are now out of time, unfortunately, but what a great session. Thank you so much, Tracey. Absolutely brilliant. Cramming all that into an hour, I think it's been really informative and really helpful. I believe there's some freebies that are coming everybody's way.
I'm going to give Centre Dev a little bit of an infographic, just basically summarising what we've talked about today in a kind of a visual way, just to help as a little bit of an aid memoir. It's not anything massively detailed, but yeah, just a little bit of an infographic just to help you sort of remind yourself on those things. There's some of the terminology, some of the jargon that people use, just to help you understand what that is if you come across it in an Agile space and you're like, what on earth is that?
Thank you. That'll be really, really helpful. We'll get that onto our site and we'll send those links out to everybody. So it'll come your way, so please don't worry about that. It'll be with you along with access to recording of this as well.
Can I guess sorry, Jen, just quickly jump in, just to let you all know, I've bobbed the Prospect Change business page into the chat, as well as Tracey's profile and my profile as well. Do give us a follow on Prospect Change. We often share posts and blogs and articles and things which are all helpful in terms of how to get your PMO set up, how to rescue a PMO, how to keep your projects and programs on track. So do give us a follow, and we'll share booking links as well. So if you require any help or want to chat about anything in PMO project or program space, do just pop some time in our diaries and we'll have a chat with you.
Thank you, Ruth. And as a change community, if you've got anything that you'd like to see in terms of webinars going forward, just drop us a note and we'd be happy to try and host that. Equally, if you'd like to be a speaker in any of our webinars as well, let's get together and discuss what that could look like. Right, everyone. I will
just say, have a go, because it's not as terrifying as I thought it was. It's a very nice group, so yeah.
Oh no, thank you once again, Tracey. We really do appreciate you coming on today, and thank you everybody for taking time out to join us.
Thank you.